Good morning. Welcome to the 2019 NALEO Presidential Candidate Forum. Please note that you must be seated within 5 minutes. Because this program will be broadcasted, you will not be permitted to leave your seats after we start or stand up to take pictures. Thank you in advance for your understanding and assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats, for the program will begin shortly. Thank you. Good morning. At this time, please be seated immediately so that we can begin the forum. Please welcome Chief Executive Officer of NALEO and NALEO Educational Fund, Arturo Vargas.
Buenos dias. Good morning. Welcome to the NALEO Presidential Candidate Forum at the NALEO 36th Annual Conference here at the Telemundo Center. We are continuing today a NALEO tradition, an engagement with NALEO's membership, America's public servants at the front lines of America's challenges, those who lead school boards, school districts, cities, counties, states, and are helping to lead the nation, an engagement with those who seek to sit in the Oval Office. And in that spirit, I'd like to invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would please stand. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All eyes of the country, indeed all eyes of the world, are on us this moment as we engage in this conversation between the leaders of the Latino community and 8 of the candidates for the nomination of the presidency of the United States of their party. We invited every single declared candidate to be with us today of both parties. 8 accepted our invitation, and we will welcome them individually on stage. We hope they are here because they understand the importance of the Latino electorate, of the Latino population, but in particular the importance of all of you, the NALEO membership and constituency, those who have themselves been elected or appointed to serve in public office, to carry out the duties of service to all of America's population. We know that whomever seeks to be the President of the United States needs a collaboration with this constituency. And it begins only with engagement, with conversation, with give and take. And that's exactly what we intend to do here today. So at this time, I would like to invite our host to welcome you to the Telemundo Center. He is my very, very good personal friend, Cesar Conde, who serves as chairman of NBC Universal International Group and NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises. The company has been a valued and trusted partner in our efforts to ensure the Latino community is counted in Census 2020, launching their own Hazte Contar campaign earlier this year in late March. I had the opportunity to be here at this center on the day of the launch of that campaign. And I can tell you that as only Cesar can make sure it happens, all of the resources of Telemundo were focused that day on that single issue of making sure that we begin preparing our community for what will be an incredibly challenging descendant enumeration that we have to do next year. But under Cesar's leadership, We know that Telemundo will be a partner with us in making sure that the community understands the importance of being counted and the harm that will come to all of us when anybody is left uncounted. He currently serves on the board of directors of Walmart and Pepsi, and he has a personal commitment to leaving the world a better place, and his depth of experience with community development work are major drivers of the important and longstanding partnership between NALEO and NBC Universal Telemundo. Again, just on a personal note, I have had the honor and privilege of calling him my friend, mi hermano. What's it been now, 15 some years? And when you see him on stage, he started here when he was little boy in his youth. But he has been an extraordinary American leader, having served as a White House fellow in various capacities in Spanish language media, and now being one of the highest ranking corporate executives in media today. Please welcome my good friend, Cesar Conde.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Arturo. Good morning, everyone. Buenos días. ¿Me escuchan bien atrás? Perfecto, estamos en Telemundo, así que quiero empezar con unas cuantas palabras en español. Primero, realmente es un orgullo y un privilegio para todos nosotros, de parte de la familia de Comcast, de NBC Universal y Telemundo, de darle la bienvenida a nuestra nueva casa matriz, aquí, Telemundo Center. Nosotros no solamente estamos agradecidos con todos ustedes por decir presente, pero con los candidatos que mencionó Arturo, que han dicho presente de estar aquí. Agradecidos con nuestro equipo Telemundo que ha trabajado tanto, pero más que nada con mi gran amigo Arturo Vargas, una persona que ha dedicado su vida a pelear por nuestra comunidad y por nuestros derechos. Y como dijo Arturo, yo tengo el placer de llamarlo un amigo por más de 15 años, más de 15 años. Muchas gracias por la colaboración, no solamente hoy día, Arturo, pero más importante por la colaboración a través de los años y en nuestra iniciativa colectiva de Hazte Contar en el Census 2020. Así que muchas gracias, Arturo. Para nosotros, en Telemundo, siendo los líderes en los medios hispanos hoy en día, nosotros tomamos muy en serio nuestra responsabilidad de asegurar que nuestra comunidad esté bien informada sobre los candidatos de todos los partidos y sobre sus posiciones en los temas que más nos impacta a nuestra comunidad latina acá en los Estados Unidos. Este foro hoy día es el principio de esos esfuerzos y estamos muy contentos que podemos lanzarlo con todos ustedes. On behalf of all of us here at Comcast, NBC Universal, and Telemundo, it is a tremendous privilege and honor to welcome you to our new global headquarters, Telemundo Center. I hope you're enjoying your first visit. Do you like the new place? Yeah. All right. I cannot think of a better place to begin this important conversation about the future of our country, but more specifically, how we highlight the role that Latinos are going to be playing. Everyone in this room knows that our community, Hispanics, are no longer just a demographic story. We are now impacting all aspects of the United States, culturally, politically, economically, on social basis, but politically is the important one. And for us at Telemundo, we've had the privilege of having this community support us, and we've established ourselves as the leader in Hispanic media over the last few years. But with that privilege, we are very cognizant comes a very important responsibility, one that we take very seriously, to ensure that our community is well informed about the candidates from all parties and the positions that they have on the issues that most impact our community. Today, this forum is the beginning of that journey as we begin to ensure that we inform and empower our community in this election cycle. We are grateful that you're here today. We hope that you will continue to support us next week on June 26th and 27th when we host back here in our hometown of Miami, the first Democratic presidential debate, along with our sister networks, NBC and MSNBC. And it's a historic debate because it will be the first time that a Spanish language network is co-hosting the first debate in a presidential cycle. So on behalf of our entire family here, thank you again for being here. Thank you, Arturo, for your partnership and friendship throughout the years. We hope you enjoy the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, César. Es un placer estar aquí y gracias por la bienvenida. I can speak Spanish too, you know. One of the things that makes NALEO a singular forum for convening is that it brings together individuals from all levels of government from throughout the country, from all Latino national origin groups, men and women, people of any sexual orientation, and of different political perspectives as well. And that's what makes NALEO unique. Each of you have been given in your registration badge what we call the NALEO standard. And that's something we hold dear, that we are here to listen and respect each other's opinions and maybe sometimes hear something we disagree with, but knowing that this is the opportunity when we can engage in conversation and model for the rest of the country what polarization does not look like, what collaboration can look like. And that is NALEO, so I invite you to join us in upholding the NALEO standard. And with that, and I'd like to call to the stage the chairman of the NALEO Educational Fund, the 501c3 nonprofit organization that implements the vision of NALEO, our sister organization, the membership organization, and implements the programs to fulfill our mission to empower the Latino community to participate fully in American political life. Please welcome a member of the West Hollywood City Council, the Honorable John Duran.
Thank you, Arturo. Is this mic on? Oh,
Yes, it
there we
is.
go. Well, greetings from the people of the city of West Hollywood, where the women are strong and the men are pretty. It's so nice to be here with you all. This morning's program, the first in the nation, gives us the unique opportunity to hear from presidential candidates about the issues that are of concern to Latinos all over our country, creating jobs, ensuring access to health care, funding excellence in education. It gives us a chance to talk about all these issues that are of concern to our community, which includes speakers of other languages and English. I like that staff put this. We speak Spanish. That's what it means. We have experienced a lot of recent hurdles of discrimination and unequal opportunity. But we've been here before. Our founder, Congressmember Edward Roybal, was elected to the LA City Council in 1949, and when he went to buy a house, he was told they wouldn't sell to him because he was Mexican. An elected official who was denied a house in his own district because of his ancestry. 5 years later, Operation Wetback, when thousands of Mexicans under the Eisenhower administration were deported back to Mexico, even though many had never been there before. They're native Californians. We've come from a place where there were separate swimming pools for us, separate drinking fountains for us, separate schools, separate wages, even the indignity of separate barbers to cut our hair. I love when people say, John, when did your family come across the border exactly? And I always smile and I say, oh, no, no, no. Your border came across my family in 1912 when New Mexico was added to the United States of America. My family has been in the Southwest for hundreds and hundreds of years. We have been creating the culture, the art, the food, the fashion, the music of the United States of America for hundreds of years, just like the Puertorriqueños in Spanish Harlem, like the Cubanos here in this great state, from Miami to Tampa. We are not new arrivals. We didn't just get here. We've been creating America for hundreds of years. And if you have any doubt, Remember this, the children's rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue aboard the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Yes, he was Italian. But when he went and talked to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, they spoke to him in Spanish about going out and discovering the New World. Spanish has been part of this part of the world long before the Constitutional Convention of 1776. Don't ever forget that. Latinos Unidos para la justicia y igualdad, para nuestras familias y nuestra dignidad. Solidaridad, hermanos y hermanas. Solidaridad. Now, let me bring up the forum moderator, Ms. Vanessa Oak, Noticias Telemundo senior correspondent. Ms. Oak is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and senior correspondent for Telemundo. From social, cultural, and political events to natural disasters, Vanessa has been a valuable source of information for U.S. Hispanics, reporting the news right where it happens. From Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to Matthew in Haiti, Vanessa has been there to cover the story. Today, she's leading the investigative unit on environmental issues at Telemundo Network Planeta Tierra. Please help me in welcoming our moderator, Vanessa Oak.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Muy buenos días y bienvenidos. Good morning and welcome to Telemundo Center and the 2019 NALEO Presidential Candidate Forum. Before I introduce our first distinguished guests, I would like to go over the structure of today's event. Each of the candidates will come to the stage one at a time. To make sure that we can hear from all of them, we will spend no more than 12 minutes with each person. We'll ask these candidates to give a 1-minute opening and closing remarks. And we will have about 10 minutes of questions and answers in between. The questions will come from me, from Arturo Vargas, and also from members of the NALEO and the NALEO Educational Fund Board of Directors. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we won't be able to take questions from the audience today. I would like to ask all our candidates to please use their time wisely, keeping in mind how much ground we need to cover today in a very short amount of time. And now, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker of the day, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Very nice to meet you, Congressman.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Congressman, thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course.
Congressman, you have 1 minute for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Buenos días. Es un honor para mí estar aquí con ustedes. And I was listening backstage to the mayor of West Hollywood talk about whose stories are included in our national story of America. And it made me think of my hometown of El Paso, Texas, a place not well understood, except for the 7 people who just clapped, by most of the rest of the country, forgotten if it was ever known in the first place, but a community that compelled me to run for office, whose story I've always wanted to share, to say that we're one half with Ciudad Juarez of the largest binational community in the hemisphere. 3 million of us from 2 countries speaking 2 languages, joined, not separated by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater, far more powerful than the sum of our parts or the number of people involved. I tell my fellow Americans in this administration, we are one of the safest cities in the United States of America, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, but because we are a city of immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. We have nothing to apologize for or be defensive about, everything to celebrate and set the example for the rest of the country. And when we include everyone's stories in this national story, there is no stopping us, there's no stopping the United States of America, and that's the way that I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States. Thank you for having us out today. Grateful. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you. So your first question. Your immigration proposal includes a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants, including the Dreamers, their parents, the TPS beneficiaries. How are you planning to do this in an increasingly polarized Congress, and would you be willing to pass an executive order?
talking about including everyone's stories, we need to make sure that we're telling the story of that child who's just survived 2,000 miles on the road from Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador, showing up here trying to follow our own asylum laws, only to find herself in a cage, or if she came with her family, her mother deported back to the very country from which she fled. On day one of our administration, we will reunite every single family that has been separated. We will no longer put children in cages. We will not build walls. We'll do all of this by executive order. But we'll also make sure that we're investing in solutions in the Northern Triangle to reduce violence, to help farmers who are trying to survive historic droughts caused not by God nor by Mother Nature, but by all of us in the climate change that we have produced. I will make sure that the 9 million legal permanent residents, green card holders in America, become U.S. citizens as soon as possible, and that the millions more, including more than 1 million dreamers, who live in a constant fear of deportation back to countries which in some cases they have not been to in decades, are able to stay here, contribute to their full potential on a pathway to citizenship, and making sure that this great country is even greater by their presence. It's economic success, it is strength, and yes, from the example of El Paso, Texas, it is our safety and our security. Doing the right thing makes us a better country.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Your next questions will come from Arturo.
Thank you, Vanessa. Congressman, we're asking this question of all the candidates because of how important the issue is to the Latino community and to the mission of this organization. The nation is about to experience the constitutionally required decennial census next year under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and 3 federal courts have even held will result in a severe undercount, especially of Latinos. If you are elected president, what course of action would you take to remedy the 2020 census and to restore confidence and integrity in the Census Bureau?
In my administration, there will be no citizenship question on the census. We will make sure that if there has been an undercount in 2020, that we get back out there and count every single American whose voice and whose story needs to be part of the national conversation. Si no podemos contar cada persona adentro de este país, no podemos contar en ellos para ofrecer su voz o su voto, no podemos tener los recursos que necesitamos en cada comunidad, en cada estado, en cada parte de este país. No vamos a tener la representación que merecemos en el Congreso, también en los congresos en los niveles estatales. If we fail to count everyone, it is a lack of resources, a lack of federal representation, and a lack of representation in state legislatures. It's going to diminish the strength of the United States of America. And we know from recently released documents that this is racist in its design. It's intended to suppress the vote of Latinos, of people of color, those whose country of national origin was some other place, who came here to contribute to our greatness. Let's make sure that they can by counting every single one of them.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Your last question is going to come from Rhode Island Secretary of State Nelly Gorbea. She's a Democrat. She's right there.
Hi, good morning. Congressman, while the nation is experiencing a robust economy and historically low unemployment rates, for many Latinos, wages are not rising and job opportunities in a modern technology-driven economy are elusive. The situation for the U.S. citizens and residents of Puerto Rico is even worse. If elected president, what policies would you pursue to provide all Latino workers the opportunity to participate in this 21st century economy through good jobs and earn wages that help them realize the American dream?
Nelly, thank you for the question. Let's make sure that everyone can participate in this economy, especially those who have been locked out of its success. In a capitalist economy, let's make sure that capital is accessible, that entrepreneurs, no matter where you live or your zip code, can access small business loans. We call for, in our plan, doubling the size of community-based credit initiatives so that more capital gets out into communities that have been denied it before. We make sure in our plan that everyone who's working can focus on just one job because they're paid a living wage, $15 an hour as the floor. And they can take time off to take care of themselves or their families or their children with paid family leave in every part of this country. And childcare, which is out of reach because it is unaffordable for so many families, is made affordable under our plan, doubling the block grants that we send to states to make childcare affordable, and ensuring that there's a fully refundable tax credit so that that tax code works not for corporations who are sitting on record piles of cash, the folks who are already wealthy at a time of historic wealth and income division, but for working Americans who need that to be able to get ahead. And then those communities, and you mentioned Puerto Rico, who have been denied the investment so that their infrastructure can sustain the success that we want to see in every single part of America, are put first. For example, in our plan to confront climate change, not only do we call for freeing ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, embracing renewable energy technology, ensuring that by 2050 we are at net zero greenhouse gas emissions and halfway there by 2030, but those communities like Puerto Rico, like Houston, Texas, who are on the front lines of climate change today, who are bearing the brunt of the storms and the floods and the disasters that we are causing to one another, they're first in line to receive the investments to fortify those communities and to ensure that they are prepared for the next challenge that they face, to ensure that they're at the front of the line in embracing these economical changes that we want to bring to this country. But lastly, when it comes to Puerto Rico and when it comes to Washington, D.C., without having real voice and representation in the halls of power, it's going to be hard for them to receive the resources that they merit as full American citizens. So I want to make sure that Puerto Rico can decide its fate. As president, I will follow the decision of the people on that island to decide how they will be represented, whether it is in the United States Senate, whether it is in some form of independence. I want to make sure that they decide and that we are able to support them. Thank you for asking the question.
Thank you so much, Congressman. You have been very efficient with your time, so we have time for one more question. And I want you to elaborate a little bit more about your plan on climate change. The United Nations scientists have been clear that we're living a climate emergency right now. How are you going to make sure that we have a very efficient transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, to a clean energy future?
I think it's really important that we understand that this is happening to us right now. Not something for which we have to prepare, not some abstraction that we can debate. People are living through this, people are dying from it. We think about those historic wildfires in California that were preceded by historic droughts. I mentioned Houston, Texas earlier. 58 inches of rain fell from the sky on that community, which is the landfall record for a single storm in the history of North America. And it was the third 500-year flood in that community in just the last 5 years. So folks who were in the process of rebuilding from the last storm were hit by this next one. And it consumed not just their properties, but very often their lives. Being in Iowa recently and going to the town of Pacific Junction along the Missouri River, meeting farmers whose fields were lakes right now, farmers who were already underwater in debt with historic low farm incomes, they're on the front lines of climate change. They need us, all of us, to do everything that we can. We cannot meet it by half steps or half measures or only half the country. It's got to be all of us. So you ask how we do this. We embrace wind and solar and the renewable energy technologies that free us from a dependence on fossil fuels. We invest in the next generation of technologies like battery storage that ensures that we can move this energy onto the grid at will, even when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. Those same rural communities on the front lines, we put them in the driver's seat to make sure that farmers are paid for the environmental services that they provide. Planting cover crops to capture more carbon out of the air, precision till farming, regenerative grazing to make sure that more of that carbon stays in the soil. So if every single one of us does our part, this country sets the example, then we can convene the other powers of the planet to ensure that as a globe, we keep this world from warming another 2 degrees Celsius. Because after that, if we fail in this task, our kids, our grandkids, the generations that follow, will see storms and floods and fires and droughts that pale in comparison to what we have right now. I want those people of the future, looking back on us, the people of 2019 and 2020, to be proud of what we have done, not to ask themselves, who were those pendejos who gave up this great opportunity that we had? So, let us be great. Let us not be pendejos.
Congressman, you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Vanessa and Arturo, and to the members of NALEO, especially my friends from Texas and El Paso, thank you for the honor of allowing me to come and speak to you today. From some of the topics that we briefly got to talk about today, it is very clear that this country is at a defining moment of truth. And we will either define ourselves forever after by our fears and our pettiness and our smallness, walls, cages for kids, Muslim bans, a level of partisanship that we have not seen before in this country. Or we can forever be known by our ambitions and our aspirations and the work and the determination and resolve that we will employ to make sure that we achieve them. I want to make sure it is the latter, not the former. That is why I'm here with you today and why I'm running to serve you as President of the United States. Thank you all for having us out. Les agradezco. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Very grateful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Very grateful.
Thank you. Great to have you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
This way, sir.
Our next guest is former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Governor, welcome to the stage. You have 1 minute for your opening remarks.
Look, Governor, good seeing you.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Muchísimas gracias por invitarme esta mañana. President Trump is fueling a national crisis of division in this country that is moving the country backwards. But socialism is not the answer. I know that because in Colorado, we brought nonprofits and business together, Democrats and Republicans together, to create the #1 economy in the country, to get to near universal health care coverage, to provide affordable college for dreamers, and to make sure we provided opportunity and protection for immigrants. I'm the one person running who has actually done the big progressive things that the other candidates are talking about. I look forward to speaking with you today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Governor. So your first question, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal in 2014, you say that citizenship was not a priority for undocumented immigrants. Then later you took those comments back, but later again in 2016, speaking to a group of community leaders, you say the same remarks. So could you please clarify your position on this? And what would be your plan for the 11 million undocumented immigrants that are right here in the country? Would you give them a path to citizenship?
So, and let me just frame this by saying when I was a young geologist, my brother was an automobile mechanic. He provided me an old beat-up Volkswagen. And when I was 22, I drove across Mexico and down through Central America and spent 9 months working in Costa Rica and came back. And that planted a seed for my entire relationship, where I have constantly been looking north and south for cultural and economic futures, and not east and west like is so traditional here. I was talking about, when I talked to the Wall Street Journal, about trying to find a way that the undocumented people in this country could go back and forth immediately and visit their families. And I believe that what I would say with the 11 million people that are here now, that we should give them a 10-year visa immediately, put them on a pathway to citizenship, and make sure that if it takes longer, they can have extensions. What I was trying to say at that time was the priority should be allow people to come out from the shadows. And my ex-wife, Helen Thorpe, wrote a book called Just Like Us, very powerful book about how it feels for young people to not be able to go and visit their grandparents. And we've been going for 16, 17, 18 years since I first got into public life, and we need to move faster in terms of finally getting to comprehensive immigration reform so that people can come out of the shadows and have real lives.
But to clarify, you will give them a pathway
Yes,
to
of course.
citizenship.
No, I was saying the priority needs to be able to let them have freedom to actually work and to travel. But yes, absolutely, everyone deserves a pathway to citizenship.
Thank you, Governor. Your next question will come from Arturo.
Thank you, Governor. And we're asking this question of all the candidates because of the importance of the issue. to the Latino community and particularly to the mission of this organization. The nation's about to experience the constitutionally required decennial enumeration, the decennial census, next year, under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and even federal courts have said will result in a severe undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you're elected president, it'll be after the census. If you're elected president, what course of action would you take to remedy the 2020 census and restore confidence and integrity in the census?
Well, I think that this entire process of trying to put on, questions like the citizenship question, which are clearly designed to get certain parts of our population not to come forward and be counted in the census, is corrupt and illegal. I think first, when I was the mayor in Denver and for the 2010 census, we went to great lengths to provide marketing and to bring together all of our neighborhoods, all of our communities to make sure everyone's counted. And most mayors, every governor that I know, every mayor that I know, recognizes the importance of a fair count because it's how you are able to serve the people of your community. As president, if I come in after this corrupt, assuming this doesn't get shot down in the courts, which I think it will, but if it goes forward, I would go use every congressional method to make sure that the count is re-verified. But I'm not sure that the president has enough power to do that in the time frame within which the recount will be used.
So are you saying that you would support perhaps doing the census over?
Yeah, if that's what it takes. In other words, if there is clear undercounts, which I think if they go forward with the questions is now enumerated, absolutely.
Okay.
Governor, your next question is going to come from former El Camino Community College District, California trustee John Vargas. He is a Republican. Question.
Proud Republican, by the way. So, Governor, Latinos have made some gains in obtaining health care coverage under the Affordable Care Act, yet continue to remain more likely to be uninsured than other groups. Having access, as you know, to health care insurance can make the difference between life and death as Latinos decide whether they can afford to get the medical care they need when they need it. A recent poll by the NALEO Educational Fund of Latino registered voters found this issue is one of their top concerns. If you're elected president, how will you address healthcare policy that provides more access to medical coverage and quality care while addressing the rise in healthcare costs?
So in Colorado, we got to almost universal coverage. I would go beyond what we have in Colorado because we do need to recognize that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. We've proposed a public option, probably some combination of either Medicare or Medicare Advantage, but the best practice there. And if done properly, it will provide an opportunity for those people that can't afford private insurance on the exchanges, or they have a pre-existing condition that prohibits them, in some cases, from getting insurance with these new regulations being proposed. That this public option would allow people to get and be able to afford private insurance. And if done successfully, that private option will expand. And as it scales, it would become less expensive, the quality would improve, it would attract more people, it would expand faster, the quality would continue to improve. Ultimately, in 10 or 15 years, we could end up with Medicare for all. But in that process, it would be an evolution and not a revolution. And I think the challenge of the Medicare for all is to expect that 180 million people, who is the number, that's the number of Americans that have private insurance now, that the majority of them don't want to give up their private insurance. It's unreasonable to think that in this country we're going to forcibly force them to give up the private insurance which they're happy with.
Governor, following up on that question, would you consider including the 11 million undocumented immigrants in that insurance?
Well, I think this country has for a long time recognized that healthcare is a vital part of our culture. When we train our doctors, they are instructed to make sure they take care of all people. It doesn't matter whether you're documented or not, you show up at a hospital and you receive care. Now, I'm not sure that we're ready to go to take to provide full health care to 11 million undocumented workers yet because we haven't provided to all of our own people. But I think that's certainly a progression that once we get to comprehensive immigration reform and we get a system that finally works and recognizes that, right now we have 7.5 million unfilled jobs and only 6.3 million people looking. We need every worker we can get. Let's get that comprehensive immigration reform, and then absolutely, once we're in balance, I think that would be the next step.
Governor, we have time for one more question, and I wanted to ask you about your environmental plan. You have said that you will bring the United States back to the Paris Accord, but you don't mention what scientists have urgently recommended, that we curb the emissions by 2030 and that we go zero net emissions by 2050. What are you going to do for the United States to lead on climate?
Sure, and I believe I'm the only professional geologist. I have a master's in earth and environmental science. I think I'm the only professional geologist ever elected a governor. I do know that I'm the first brewer elected since Sam Adams in 1792. But we have proposed an ambitious and really very aggressive approach to climate change. I recognize within 10 or 12 years, we are facing the prospect of irreversible damage, and the people most harmed will be lower income communities, not just in this country, but around the world. In Colorado, we are closing coal plants, and for the first time, replacing them with wind, solar, and batteries, and having the average monthly bills go down. We were the first state to convince the oil and gas industry and the environmental community to work together to create methane regulations. Methane is 25 times worse for the environment than CO2. So I recognize that we've got to go beyond the Paris Accords. And as president, the first thing I would do is re-sign the Paris Accords, and the second thing I would do is pledge to go beyond them. But the Green New Deal, which I support the urgency that it has, but it has distractions. It has things like a guarantee of a federal job for every single American. That would be a distraction and a difficult thing to actually provide in this country. We need to be laser focused with climate change and make sure that we are able to dramatically combat the emissions that are harming our climate in this country, but also recognize what we do here is a template for what has to happen around the world. And we need to recognize our relationships, which the Trump administration has recklessly damaged, that we have to rebuild those relationships around the world and make sure that not just with climate change, but in terms of public health, possible pandemics like Ebola, and things like cybersecurity, we are in constant engagement with the rest of the world. And certainly climate change would be at the top of that list. Governor,
you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Well, again, thank you so much for having me here. It's been an honor to be with you. When I was the mayor of Denver, we started something called the Biennial de las Americas. Again, I wanted to change the focus of this country from looking east and west all the time for our cultural touch points and our economic future, and begin looking north and south. And the Biennial de las Americas it's like a mini Davos, where we bring together political leaders, business leaders, academics to really explore solutions to the challenges that we face in this hemisphere. We share so much more in the Americas than we do problems. As president, I will make sure that everyone has the right to create their own version of the American dream. And I will proceed to create the biggest expansion of skills-based training in the history of this country. We will make sure there is a pathway to citizenship. We will make sure that we get to universal health care, where health care is a right and not a privilege. And we will support the people of Venezuela and Cuba in their pursuit of a freer and more prosperous future. I know it's easy to get frustrated with the lack of progress that comes out of Washington now. But my life as a small business owner, and then a mayor and a governor, we've been able to do the big progressive things that other people are just talking about. And my pledge to you is you give me the chance, and we will replace the fundamental nonsense in Washington with some common sense. Thank you
so much.
We want you to go this way.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you. Now I would like to welcome to the stage former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Mr. Julián Castro. Bienvenido. Bienvenido, Secretary.
Good to see you. Good seeing you. Good to see you.
Secretary Castro, you have 1 minute for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Buenos dias. Good morning.
Buenos dias.
It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. First of all, let me commend you, Arturo, and NALEO, and Vanessa, and Telemundo, and all of the folks in this room that I know, in many of your own ways, are trailblazers in your community. Like you, I know the promise of this country. You know, my grandmother came here in 1922 from Mexico as a 7-year-old orphan with her little sister and grew up on the west side of San Antonio, Texas. She came here, and at that time, she encountered signs on storefront windows that said, "No Mexicans or dogs allowed." She didn't finish school, so she worked her entire life as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter. She raised my mom as a single parent, and my mom became the first in her family to graduate from high school and then go on to college. She became a hellraiser, part of the old Chicano movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s. And she raised my brother Joaquin and me as a single parent so that we could go even further. And to think, just 2 generations after my grandmother got here to this country, one of her grandsons, my brother Joaquin, is serving in the United States Congress, and the other is running for President of the United States. That is our country. That is America. And I look forward to talking to you about how we can make sure that that kind of opportunity is there for everybody in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Castro. So your first question, you were among the first candidates to propose and to put forward a plan on immigration reform. In it, you proposed to decriminalize undocumented border crossing, making it a civil offense instead of a criminal one, to eradicate the 3- and 10-year ban on re-entry for people that have been deported, and also to end the cooperation between ICE and the police departments around the nation. How are you planning to tackling all this with a very, very divided Congress? And where do you begin?
Yeah, well, first let me say that I'm proud that I was the first candidate to propose a comprehensive immigration plan. And I did that because this is personal for me and because it's so important to our country, because I grew up with a grandmother who was an immigrant, and I know the power of immigrants in this country, and that the folks who are coming to our southern border today have the same hopes and the same dreams and the same belief in our country that generations of immigrants have had. So your question is, what are we going to do about the fact that we've had a very divided Washington and that over the years, it's been hard to get things done? I believe that on January 20th, 2021, at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. And the lesson of 2009 and 2010 on immigration reform is don't wait. Don't wait. We're not going to wait. We're going to go forward with immigration reform. And then some folks say, well, what about when it gets to the Senate? You may remember that last time immigration reform got 68 votes in the Senate, but sometimes the Senate can be a problem because they have the filibuster that requires 60 votes. If the choice is between fixing our broken immigration system, making sure that America can thrive because we harness the power of immigrants, and also that we treat people with basic respect. If the choice is that, or some 60-vote rule that is not in the Constitution, that has been violated over the years by both parties when they see it as convenient, then I'm going to choose fixing our broken immigration system in 2021.
Would you consider using your executive power to do so?
I will. I will use my executive power in any way that I can. For instance, immediately expanding DACA, providing protections that we can. For instance, a good example of this is the situation with Venezuelans who are here. Right? It took an act of Congress, bipartisan act of Congress, to try and protect Venezuelans with TPS. That is something that usually the administration can do and should do.
And if I'm president, I'm going to use my executive authority as much as we possibly can to protect these hardworking immigrants.
Thank you, Secretary Castro. Your next question comes from Arturo.
Thank you, Vanessa. Mr. Secretary, we're asking the same question of all the candidates here because how important this issue is to the Latino community and to the mission of NALEO. The nation is about to experience the constitutionally required decennial census next year under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and even 3 federal courts have said will result in a severe undercount, especially of Latinos. If you're elected president, what will you do to remedy the 2020 census, which will already have occurred? And how will you restore credibility and integrity in the census?
Well, and I want to thank you, Arturo, because I know that you've been working on this issue. NALEO has had forums all over the country on this to make people aware of the problem that we have here and why this citizenship question should not go on the census. My hope is that we're going to get a decision soon from the Supreme Court that is positive and that this question will not go on the census. If it does, then, and I'm elected president, I will do everything that I can to make sure that we do an accurate count. As you know, this is not unprecedented for us to do this. We have the American Community Survey that we do every year. I believe that either through that or through doing another census that we can do a more robust count. And this is important. I know that the elected officials and appointed officials in this room understand this. This goes to how much CDBG dollars you get, how much transportation funding you get, how much education funding you get. This is important because it's estimated that up to 4 million people could be undercounted if this question goes on the census. And a lot of those are going to be Latinos. And you know what the game is. The game, even if this never happens, is to scare people into not participating. I will remedy that if I'm president.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Secretary. Well, your last question is going to come from El Cononino County, Arizona Supervisor and NALEO Board Treasurer, Elizabeth Archuleta. She's a Democrat.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Yesterday at this conference, we heard from a panel of economic experts, and all agreed that investing in our nation's infrastructure would further strengthen the economy. What is your plan to address our nation's crumbling infrastructure as an economic strategy?
Thank you very much for the question. Do y'all remember a few years ago that there was a bridge that collapsed in the Twin Cities? Do folks remember that? Right? And at the time, it was reported that there are actually thousands of different types of infrastructure in this country that are in danger, eventually of falling apart if we don't invest. And so I've said that we need to do a big investment in infrastructure, not only in traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges, our airports, but also 21st century infrastructure. When I was the Secretary of Department of Housing and Urban Development, we tried to extend broadband to families living in public housing. We need to continue to extend broadband into rural communities so that both with traditional infrastructure and 21st century infrastructure, America is poised to succeed because we've invested in people and communities like we should. And during the course of this campaign, I look forward to providing a detailed plan on what type of infrastructure investments that we would make. Infrastructure, I'll just say, is the last thing, yes, is also important because it's about connecting the dots. Infrastructure improves the quality of life in neighborhoods, as the local elected officials see and know that are here today. It provides jobs and opportunity for people. Oftentimes, it makes communities safer if it's done right. And so we are going to do a big infrastructure package for traditional and 21st century infrastructure in this country.
Secretary Castro, you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Well, you know, the other day, somebody asked me, what's the first thing that you would do if you're elected president of the United States? And I told them that the first thing I would do is that I would sign an executive order recommitting the United States to the Paris Climate Accord so that we lead again on sustainability on the afternoon of January 20th, 2021. But I also told them that I actually look forward to a moment that would come a little bit earlier in the day when it's traditional for the incoming president to usher out the outgoing president. You know, I can just imagine being there with my wife, Erica, and our daughter, Karina, and our son, Christian, on the White House lawn, getting ready to say goodbye to Donald Trump and Melania Trump. And they'll be getting ready to go off to New York or Mar-a-Lago or somewhere. The helicopter will be off in the distance, ready to take him away on the White House lawn. And right before he leaves, right before he walks off, I'm going to tell him, adios. Thank you all very much. Thank you for everything that you do in your communities. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
You have 1 minute for your opening remark.
All right, buenos días. Good morning. Gracias por invitarme. And thank you so much for the opportunity and for the work that you do. I'm running for president because I believe we are living at a moment of such seriousness and such opportunity that we've got to do something completely different. That what's at stake right now is not just the next 3 or 4 years, but that what happens in the next 3 or 4 years will decide how America functions for the next 30 or 40. And in that context, I think more than anything, we need to fall back on our values. Values like freedom. We can clap for freedom. Security, democracy. But also that my party must insist that these values do not belong to one party. La libertad, la seguridad, la democracia no son valores conservadores, son valores americanos. So in that spirit, we're organizing a different kind of campaign. And I believe this moment calls for a different message and a rather different messenger, which I recognize that I am. A middle-class mayor from the American industrial Midwest, from a new generation, at a moment when America needs a new generation of leadership to step forward. When my party needs to demonstrate that it can speak to every part of the country, including a hometown like mine, whose story is living proof that there is no such thing as an honest politics built around the word again. And I think that we can do that, and in so doing, be more likely to win as a party than if we try to play it safe.
Wonderful, Mayor Buttigieg. So when you were the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, a city with a Latino population of just 13%, you make sure that undocumented immigrants that were living in the city got a community resident card. Basically, this is an ID that serves as a legal form of identification. Why was this a priority for you? And would you consider a measure like this nationwide if you become the president?
Yes, thank you. This was a priority for me because it was a priority for so many in the community. We have a growing and vibrant Latino community in South Bend. As you said, it's approaching 15% now, and not all of those individuals are documented. And as a city, my responsibility as a mayor is, in fact, not only to citizens, but to residents. And what we realized is we had many residents who were not able to access things that the rest of us take for granted. Just the ability to pick up a prescription, the idea that you can verify that you were the parent of a child that you're picking up from daycare. And in an interaction with the police, the ability to establish who you are. Something so important for residents, but also for law enforcement to be able to do their job. And so as residents came to us and activists said, you can help us here, I realized that we didn't have to wait on the federal government or the state government to solve this problem. We could establish a local municipal ID card, not only for undocumented residents, I've got one myself, but something that would be very useful for undocumented residents. And yes, I do believe it is the responsibility of the federal government to make sure anyone who lives here, regardless of their immigration status, has a means to demonstrate that they are who they say they are.
Wonderful. One quick reaction before we go to Arturo. Yesterday, Telemundo had an exclusive interview with the president, and when José Díaz-Balart told him that you were up in the polls and that you could be a great adversary, his answer was that he just didn't believe it. What's your reaction to that?
Well, as a general rule, when the president says something, the opposite tends to be true. So I guess it's very good news for my prospects.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Your next question is going to come from Arturo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're asking the same question of everybody because how important this issue is to the Latino community and to the mission of this organization. The nation is about to experience the constitutionally required census next year under circumstances and policies that practitioners, researchers, and even 3 federal courts have said will result in a dramatic undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you become president of the United States, the census already will have been taken. But what steps will you take to remedy the 2020 census, and how will you restore integrity and credibility in the Census Bureau?
Well, this is such an important question, and I'm glad that you're shining a light on it because it's one of those process things that maybe is considered unglamorous and doesn't get the attention that it deserves. But I know as a mayor how important it is to have an accurate census. I spoke of the growing Latino community in South Bend. We are proud as an industrial city, one that lost so many jobs after the factories left a generation or 2 ago. We're proud that we are growing today. If you removed the role that immigration has played, that growth, that modest growth that I'm so proud of in our city, would be 0. It would be flatlined. And if we don't properly count the people living in our community, then the people living in our community will be shortchanged in 1,000 ways that rely on the census. And so this is vitally important for communities like ours. Plus, we know from evidence in some of these court proceedings that this manipulation of the census has been motivated racially and politically. It is wrong, and we must resist that. But as you've said, by the time the new president takes office, it will have taken place. There are certainly measures on a forward-looking basis that the next president can undertake, beginning with enshrining in law the principle that you cannot manipulate the census for political advantage, and that you would never introduce a question that is likely to distort or diminish the accuracy of the census. And by the way, we don't have to wait every 10 years to make a difference because the Census Bureau also does so many other forms of community counts in between, the estimates, the numbers that are just the lifeblood of a lot of the decision making that we make in local government. But the other thing is that we can act right now to make sure that people understand the importance of being counted. That's why this Este Contar initiative is so vitally important, and I pledge to use whatever visibility that I have as a candidate to help make sure that everyone understands the importance of making themselves counted, to dilute the distorting effect of these manipulations, no matter what the courts decide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And your last question is going to come from Colorado State Senate President Leroy Garcia, a Democrat. Your question.
Mayor, from one veteran to another, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
While the nation is experiencing a robust economy and historically low unemployment rates, for many Latino, wages are not rising and job opportunities in modern technology-driven economies remain elusive. And the situation for U.S. citizens and residents from Puerto Rico is even worse. If elected president, what policies would you pursue to provide all Latino workers the opportunity to fully participate in the 21st century economy and a workforce through good jobs that earn wages that can help them realize the American dream?
Thank you, and thank you for your service to the country and to the people in Colorado, where your chamber and your state is doing remarkable work. This is so important, and I wish we had hours to dig into it, but let me mention a few things that I think are at stake, because we have to ask ourselves, how is it if GDP is rising that life expectancy is not? It asks us what it is we're counting and who the economy is working for. And as you've said, so many are left out of this economic growth. We as policymakers need to find ways to make the 21st century economy work for a generation, if you're my age or younger, a generation that is likely to wind up changing professions more often than my parents changed job titles. Some of these solutions will be complex. Finding ways to have portable and prorated benefits so that if you have a combination of gigs and part-time jobs, you have as much of a contribution to your retirement and your health and your ability to have paid time off as if you were a full-time worker. But and we can work on that. But some of the solutions are abundantly simple, like people need to get paid more, and that's why we've got to raise the minimum wage to $15 as a beginning. And when we do, that will disproportionately benefit Latino workers, so many of whom are in those jobs. But it's not only workers in minimum wage jobs that can benefit everybody. We also need to strengthen labor. It's not an accident that we've seen inequality rise, opportunity fall, the American dream slip away, at the same time, over those same years, in which membership in organized labor has fallen. We need labor to defend not only pay and wages, but working conditions and rights for workers. And a foundation of access to the American dream, once we can get the economy working better with fairer working conditions and better pay, is education. And that's why we need a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education.
Thank you so much.
There was a reference to Puerto Rico.
Yes, for Puerto Rico. So, sorry. So, America must welcome the decision of the people of Puerto Rico. And if that decision is statehood, America must welcome that. And we must not wait for that. But as a matter of principle, we must not wait for statehood to see our fellow U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico treated equally and represented properly. I believe the kinds of things we saw, like the embarrassingly poor response to the hurricane, would not have happened if Puerto Rico were afforded electoral votes. And I believe that we don't have to wait for statehood in order for that to happen.
Thank you, Mayor. You have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Well, thank you. Again, I thank you for the work that you're doing at every level of government. I stand before you as a presidential candidate, but I also think the time has come for my party and politics in general to stop treating the presidency like it's the only office that matters. Because the work that you are doing at every level, and especially in state and local government, is where so many of these issues cash out. And one of the things that you see at NALEO, as you see in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, is a room full of people, elected officials, from both parties who get along not by submerging their values, but through good faith discussion, who like each other. Imagine if we could get the United States Congress to look like that. And my point is that part of the idea of stepping up as a candidate who is not traditional, not only in terms of the age and the background that I come from, but also the idea of sending a mayor out there, is that got some fellow mayors in the house. The point is that we would be well served if we could get Washington to look more like the community of U.S. mayors. If we get Washington to look more like our best run cities and towns before the reverse starts to happen. We need change. We need profound change. We don't need to change the values of our party. At least I don't believe we do. But we do need new kinds of messengers, new kinds of outreach, a new recognition of the moment that we're in, that there's no going back to normal, that we are where we are. Because normal let so many people down under Republican and Democratic administrations across my lifetime. And that's why we have an opportunity to do something new. We can't spend all our time talking about this president. When he lies, we will call it out. When he does something wrong, we will confront it. But the more we are talking about him, the less we are talking about you, about the people that you and I serve. And that's why, as a matter of political strategy, but also just as the right thing to do for this country, we're not going to go on his show, this game show or horror show or whatever you want to call it. If you're on his show, you're losing. And so instead of going on his show, we have the opportunity to change the channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Our next guest is Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator, welcome. Thank you.
Welcome, Senator.
So nice to see you.
Good seeing you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good morning. Buenos dias. Good morning. It's good to see everyone. Shall I start?
1 minute for your opening remarks,
All
Senator.
right. So there's probably nobody who is less likely to be standing here as a candidate for president than me. I'm somebody who grew up in a paycheck-to-paycheck family, a family that struggled. I'm the baby. I have 3 older brothers. My daddy had a lot of different jobs. When he had a heart attack and was out of work for a long, long time, I remember what it was like as a kid to see us lose our family car and to come within inches of losing our family home. I watched my parents struggle, and I watched them do everything they could for us kids. Me, I had a dream growing up. My dream wasn't about being president. My dream was to be a public school teacher. Can we hear it for America's public school teachers? But you know, to be a public school teacher, you got to go to college, and we didn't have the money for a college application, much less to send me off to 4 years at a university. I have a bumpy story. I got married early. I dropped out of school. But I finally had my chance, and it was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. And that's how I made it. I became a special needs teacher. I have actually lived my dream. For me, the fundamental question in the 2020 election is about who government works for. When government sets a minimum wage, it's the difference between whether a family can succeed or fail. When government invests in higher education, it's the difference between whether or not a kid gets a chance to finish an education and become a public school teacher. When a government works just for a thinner and thinner slice at the top and isn't working for everyone else, that's just corruption, pure and simple. We need to call it out, and in 2020, we need to change it and make this government work for all of us.
Thank you, Senator. So your first question, your campaign slogan is, I have a plan for that. But as it pertains to immigration reform, we have yet to hear your proposal. Now, in the meantime, President Trump has convinced a significant number of voters that this country is facing a real crisis with the immigration crisis that is coming up in the borders. And that is, this is one of the most dangerous problems, according to him. Rather than letting one side define the debate of immigration, how soon can your campaign deliver a plan on immigration, and could we have a preview here today?
So I'm very glad you asked about this. You know, we start every question, I think, about immigration or any other public policy with a statement of our values, a statement of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And for me, on this one, it's pretty clear. We want to have an immigration policy that's good for our economy, that keeps us safe, and that is in alignment with our values. We start with the fact that in America, immigration makes us stronger, not weaker. And we need to have an immigration system that capitalizes on that. So let's talk about what that is. The first part, obviously, is we need to deal with the people who are here, and that means a pathway to citizenship. We need to protect our dreamers. We need to keep families together. It's consistent with our values. It's good for the United States of America. We need to reform our TPS system to make sure that people who are here on temporary protected status get to stay here. They're integrated into communities and families here. That's important for us. But we also need to look at the systematic problems in the immigration system. And let me just start with one of them. And that's the fact that there's too much profit now in the system. And that's why I have a plan. It's true. To push the private profits out of the incarceration system. And that means both in our criminal justice system and in our immigration system. Right now, there are giant companies that profit off this system. 73% of the people who are currently detained on immigration status are held in for-profit detention centers. Now, where's the biggest problem with for-profit detention centers? You've just created a group that makes its money by seeing more people locked up. And that means they go to Washington and lobby for laws that keep locking up more people. You know, this is what I mean when I say who Washington works for. We have a Washington right now that works great for those who want to invest in private prisons and private incarceration. It's just not working for the families and the people who are destroyed by it. So I say, get the profits out of locking people up. And that also includes the other ways they figure to profit off people's misery. So at some of these places, you realize they charge people $8 a minute to use telephone services. They charge people for video conferencing. Families go broke just trying to stay in touch with their loved ones who have not been convicted of a crime, loved ones who just want to be part of their families and part of their communities. I say no more on that. No more profiteering off people who are lost.
Yes, Senator.
We need real oversight. So there are lots of pieces to what we need to do, but this is a place to start. And the reason I start there is because over and over, the problem we've got in Washington is that our government policies are set by those who can hire the armies of lobbyists, the armies of lawyers, make the big campaign contributions, put the dark money into politics, do bought and paid for experts. In other words, shape all of the policy in a way that helps them, helps giant corporations at the top, and doesn't help anyone else. 2020 is our chance to fight back, and that's why I'm in this fight.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, before we continue, I would like your reaction. President Trump has called Mexicans drug traffickers, rapists, yes. And yesterday in our exclusive interview with Telemundo, he called you Pocahontas when José Díaz-Balart told him that you were a great adversary. So what is your reaction to this type of rhetoric coming from the highest office of the nation?
You know, this is just plain ugly. It is. But it's ugly with a plan. And the plan is to turn working people against working people. It's to say to everybody in this country, if you have a problem, if your wages haven't gone up, but the cost of sending your kid to school has gone up, if health care costs have gone up for you and you can't afford housing, blame them. Blame people who don't look like you. Blame people who don't sound like you. Blame people who don't worship like you. Blame people who weren't born in the same place that you were born. Because so long as Donald Trump and the Republican Party can turn working people against working people, then they figure no one notices who's really getting rich and who's running this country. Well, I say enough of that. Working people know what's wrong with this country, and we're ready to fight back.
Thank you, Senator. Your next question from Arturo.
Senator, we're asking this question of all the candidates because how important the issue is to the Latino community and to this organization in particular. The nation's about to experience the constitutionally required decennial census under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and federal courts have said will result in an undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you're elected president, the census already will have taken place.
Yes.
What would you do to remedy the 2020 census, and how would you restore credibility and integrity to it?
So let me start by saying I understand how deeply important this is. We need an accurate count. We need it so that we can get appropriate funding for health care and for education. We need it so we can have appropriate representation for voting. We need it so that all of our people here in the United States are counted precisely as the Constitution declares. It's also perfectly clear now what the intent of the Trump administration is. They're no longer even coy about this. It's now come out that they've said the whole point of adding the citizenship question to the census is to try to suppress responses, and the experts say that's exactly what it's going to do. So here's where I stand on this one right now. That is, we have to wait and let the Supreme Court make its decision. There's been a lot of new evidence that's come in since the case was originally argued, a lot that exposes the politics that went on and what it is that the Trump administration is trying to do by the addition of this question. Let's let the Supreme Court make a decision, but do understand this. If the Supreme Court decides to go forward and let that question be added, and we know it will suppress the response. I've been thinking hard about this one, and I will have a plan to deal with it. But this is really important. This is not about dodging. It's about saying, let the Supreme Court, that's where it stands right now. There's been a lot of new evidence that's come in. I think it's critically important that the Supreme Court issue its decision, and then depending on exactly what it is the Supreme Court says, I think we'll have the right response. But I get how important this is.
Senator, you have time now for your closing remarks.
Oh, thank you all for inviting me here today. You know, this really is a fundamental question in 2020 about who government is going to work for. Is it just going to work for a thin slice at the top, or is it going to work for everyone else? My daddy, he ended up as a janitor, but his baby daughter had a chance to become a public school teacher, a college professor, a United States senator, and a candidate for president of the United States, all because somebody invested in opportunity. That's the America I want to see. I want to see us put a wealth tax in. I want the top 0.1% to just pitch in 2 cents so that together we can invest in the rest of America, in universal child care, in universal pre-K for all of our kids, in raising the wages of every preschool teacher and child care worker in America, of making technical school and 2-year college and 4-year college tuition free for all of our kids, of putting $50 billion into historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions, and of canceling student loan debt for 95% of the kids who have student loan debt. This is about our values. It's about where, as a country, we believe we should be investing. Should we leave that 2 cents with the top 0.1%? Or should we do what we know is right and say, you make it big, good for you. Nobody wants to punish you, but pitch in 2 cents so that every one of our kids has a chance to make it in life. That's the America of our best values. That's what we have an opportunity to do. I'm so deeply grateful to be here. I see this as an America where we really have a chance to dream big, to fight hard, and to win. That's what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Congressman Eric Swalwell. Congressman, welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good seeing you, Congressman.
Congressman, you have 1 minute for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Buenos dias. My name's Eric Swalwell, and I am running for president to bring the promise of America to all Americans. And it's a promise my parents chased very hard when they believed that their hard work would add up to their firstborn being the first in the family to go to college. It paid off. I was able to work as a prosecutor in the community where I grew up, served as a city councilman, and went to Congress at age 31. But with my eyes open, I have seen all the people in this country who work very hard, and they don't do better, and they don't dream bigger. And I come to you this morning with great urgency, particularly for your community. There is nothing this president will not do to hold you back. He will break up your families. He will cage your children. And he has weaponized counting. And there is nothing we won't do to stop him. We will move our feet, raise our voices, and go all the way to the ballot box to make sure that our children are free to learn, that we're free from going broke when we get sick, free from discrimination, and free to work and see that hard work add up to doing better, dreaming bigger. That's the promise of America. I believe in this great country. I believe in your community that we can bring it to all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. So your first question, we know that immigration can be an approach as a standalone issue. Central American migrants are coming to this country running away from poverty, from corruption, from violence, and from the impacts of climate change that are very real in the region today. If you become the president, what would you do to address the root cause of the migrant crisis, and how soon could we see an immigration reform?
Immediately. On immigration, where this president has brought showmanship, I will bring leadership. I'll start by convening the president of Mexico and the president of the Central American countries where most migrants are coming from, and we'll invest there. We have to understand, and I've recently went to the San Diego sector to a detention center, and I saw in a very small room dozens of people, children, no food, no beds, no showers, but I saw them. And this president doesn't see them, and because he doesn't see them, he doesn't know that they went on this journey for over 1,000 miles with little food, little water, almost guaranteed separation when they got here, and they still believe that that was safer than where they were leaving. It will cost us less if we provide economic security in their countries. It'll cost us less if we provide economic opportunity in their countries. So you can't just go to the border on this issue. Leadership commands going beyond the border, and I would do that immediately.
Thank you, Congressman. Your next question from Arturo.
Thank you, Vanessa. Congressman, we're asking this question of everybody because of how important this issue is to the Latino community and to this organization in particular. Next year, the country is going to undertake the constitutionally required decennial census under circumstances and policies that practitioners, researchers, and federal courts have said will result in a severe undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you are elected president, the census already will have occurred. But what would you do to remedy the 2020 census, and how would you restore credibility and integrity in the census?
We'll recount it if we have to. We'll count it until we get it right. Every person will be counted in America if I'm president. But we're not powerless. We're not powerless to these abuses. And in many ways, the president has weaponized the census because of your success. Your community is suffering as victims of your own success. In the last midterm election, you moved your feet from the town squares to the town halls, all the way to the ballot boxes. We elected the most diverse Democratic caucus ever. More women, more people of color, more people from the LGBTQ community. The new American majority is going to be a Latino majority. The president knows this, and he's trying to hold us back, but we're not powerless. So in the Congress right now, we're not going to fund discriminatory census practices. We're not going to go back to the double box counting that he has continued to do, and we're going to make sure that particularly Latino children, who are even more undercounted than the Latino population at large, will also be counted by training individuals to make sure that Latino children are counted. But again, if I'm president and we're in a position where the count is not right, I'm not afraid to use the resources of the United States government to get that count right.
Thank you, Congressman. Your last question will come from Indiana State Representative and NALEO Educational Fund Board member, Mara Candelaria Rendon. She's a Democrat. Question.
Thank you. Congressman Swalwell, one of the strains on the national economy is the fact that entitlement programs comprise up to half of the federal government budget. How will you address the federal government's growing deficit while maintaining critical safety nets in place for vulnerable populations?
Invest in the future and see that those investments will have a return that will bring down our debt and expand opportunity for more people. I come from a town called Dublin, California. When I grew up there, some Dublin folks are in the house. When I grew up there, everyone around us called us scrublin. It was right smack in the middle of the middle class. And we didn't really have too many high-paying jobs. We had mostly just fast food restaurants. And when I graduated high school, only a third of us went off to college. But over a 15-year period, we invested in rail and connected us to the greater San Francisco Bay Area. We rebuilt the high school. We were able to entice businesses to come in. If they were able to create jobs, we returned their sales tax dollars to them. We grew out of the great economic recession. And I worked as a planning commissioner and a city councilman to help that happen. If we can do that in Dublin, invest in infrastructure, invest in education, modernize our schools, we can do that everywhere. I know Dublin's success story is one that can be achieved everywhere. And I think if you have a president of the future who's going to have to live with the decisions that he or she makes, that's the best way to make sure every American city can compete in the future for every American who wants to work and be a part of it.
Congressman, we have time for one more question. And I wanted to ask you, we are right here in Miami, just a few miles away from Parling, a community that not long ago suffered from terrible horror where somebody went to the school and massacred children. As a mother, I know that this is a very important issue for me, and I want to make sure that when I send my children to school, they are going to be safe. What are you going to do to make sure that our children are going to be safe?
Ending gun violence will be my top priority as president. And until we have a president who makes it a top priority, we're only going to respond to the last shooting. We'll be told that we can only mourn and never act. I approach this as a former prosecutor who worked in Oakland, California. I approach this as a Judiciary Committee member who has just recently worked to pass background checks, but we need to get that passed in the Senate. I approach this as a father of a 2-year-old who took his son to preschool 2 weeks ago for the first time and feared what you feared and what every parent fears, that they'll get that call. My plan calls for banning and buying back the 15 million assault weapons that only belong on our battlefields, never belong in our communities. To have universal background checks and to invest block by block in our cities, places that have lost hope, places that don't need a crime bill, they need a hope bill. I just happen to believe that we love our children and we love each other more than we love our guns.
Thank you so much. Congressman, you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you again to NALEO and for what you are doing and what we will need you to do in this upcoming election. The future of America depends on the opportunities extended to young Latino Americans, the fastest growing demographic in America. Put a president in the White House who is paying off his student loan debt, and you will have a voice for solutions for 0% interest on student loan debt for every American. Put a young father in the White House who's fighting insurance companies and paying high prescription drug costs, and you'll have a voice to make sure every single American has health care and we bring down the cost of prescription drugs. And put a young father in the White House who worries about his kid's safety at school, and you'll have a voice who immediately in the first 100 days brings forth solutions so everyone's kids can be safe in school. That's the promise of America. Let's work together next November. Bring that promise to all Americans. Thank you so much, NALEO. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Very nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Our next guest is Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good seeing you, sir.
Senator
Hello?
Sanders, you have welcome. You have 1 minute for your opening
Jumped the
statement.
gun already here. All right. Buenos dias, and let me thank NALEO for the enormously important work that you do in this critical and frightening moment in American history. It goes without saying that as the son of an immigrant, somebody who came to this country at the age of 17, very little education, no money, couldn't speak a word of English, I am appalled and disgusted by Trump's racism and his xenophobia. And I will, on the first day that I am President of the United States, do everything that I can to end the fear that so many people in this country are experiencing and end the damage that Trump has done to this country. Trump wants to divide us up. We will defeat Trump because we will bring our people together around an agenda that works for all people and not just the 1%. Healthcare is a human right. Education is a human right. When you work 40 hours a week, you should not live in poverty. We're going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. And we're going to make certain that every American has affordable housing and lives with dignity. Thank you.
Senator Sanders, over the past couple of years, the Trump administration has demonized the issue of immigration, calling for the militarization of our border and a zero-tolerance policy that has resulted in the death of at least 7 children and countless separations of families.
Yes.
This rhetoric, fueled by fear, has created a humanitarian crisis at our border. Today, little is said about the amazing contribution of immigrants to the United States and how essential they are to the success of our nation. If you become the president, how would you make right and would you set the record straight for our community? And how soon can we see an immigration reform? And would you name many Latinos for your candidate?
We cannot, thank you for that question. We cannot have real immigration reform unless we have people from the immigration community at the table helping to work out that comprehensive immigration reform. So to answer your question, literally on the first week that we together are in office, we are going to use all of the powers of the presidency, all of the executive orders that we can, to undo the fear and the damage that this president has done. My father was an immigrant, as I said. And if Trump wants to throw out millions and millions of immigrants, which, by the way, we will never allow him to do, he would be in quite a shock to know what that does to the economy. I'm not quite sure that we would have food on our tables or that the price of food would not skyrocket. I'm not quite sure that the construction industry would not collapse. And I'm not quite sure that a lot of families in this country who look to immigrants to take care of their kids would no longer have that care. So what we have got to do is to understand that Trump is a demagogue, and he does what demagogues always do. And what that is to pick on a minority, and today that minority is the immigrant community, try to divide up the nation and bring people against that one community, blame that community for all of the problems that the country experiences. And again, our approach is radically different. We are going to look at the real problems facing the working families of this country: low wages, poor educational opportunity, housing that is not affordable, 500,000 people sleeping out on the street, a criminal justice system which is broken. And we're going to look at those problems, and we bring all of our people together, black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American. And we say that we stand together to create the economy and the government that works for all of us, not just the people on top.
Senator, but again, how do you restore respect and dignity to this dialogue that we're hearing nationwide? Yesterday, again, for when we did the interview, the exclusive interview with the president, he called you crazy and tired. How do we restore and change this dialogue?
He called me crazy. Look, in a sense, we do exactly the opposite of what Trump does. Trump demonizes immigrants and tries to bring people against them so that he can get a few more votes. What we do is talk about the simple reality that America today was created by your parents and my father and all of the immigrants in this country who did some of the most difficult work imaginable to help create this country. We honor our immigrants. We are proud of the accomplishment of our immigrants. We understand that we are a nation of immigrants. We do not demonize immigrants. We appreciate the incredible sacrifices they made to build this country.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you. Your next question, Arturo.
Thank you, Senator, and welcome back to the NALEO conference.
Thank you.
Now, we're asking this question of all the candidates because how important this issue is to the Latino community and to our organization in particular. Next year, the country will experience a constitutionally required decennial census. Under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and federal courts have said will result in an undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you're elected president, the census will have already occurred. But what will you do to remedy the 2020 count? And how will you restore credibility and integrity to the census?
Well, I think for a start, even before we worry about what I do after I'm president, we should talk about what might be able to be done in the next several months. And that is, the Congress has the ability to pass language which says we will not fund something unless something is eliminated. And I've done that over the years. And I think it was a damn good idea to say that we're not going to fund money for the census unless that absolutely bigoted language is taken out of the census. So I think we might want to jump in before it. And second, I think, as others have stated, I think if, as you indicate, and I believe would be the case, there would be a significant undercount, which means that minority communities would have less representation in Congress. Those communities would get less federal money. I think we would look about the possibility, the constitutionality of, in fact, doing a recount.
Thank you, Senator. And your last question will come from Dallas County Treasurer and NALEO President Pauline Medrano. She's a Democrat.
Thank you. Senator, thank you very much for being here. There are numerous examples of socialized medical care around the world. We know what you believe the benefits of this approach are. What are the weaknesses and how would you remedy them in your health plan for this country?
All right, let me start by saying just a few things. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child. We are spending twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other nation, and the cost of prescription drugs here are far higher. I believe that health care is a human right. I will not allow 30,000 Americans every year to die because they don't have access to a doctor. And I will end the insanity of people going bankrupt because they come out of a hospital with an outrageous bill they cannot pay. The function of healthcare in America today is to make billions in profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. We are going to end that and create a Medicare for all healthcare system which guarantees healthcare to every man, woman, and child and saves the average American substantial sums of money. Now, to answer your question, I will not deny that every country on earth that has a national healthcare program all have problems. That's the nature of healthcare and a changing technology. But what I want everybody to understand is literally starting yesterday, the insurance companies and their drug companies are starting to spend tens and tens of millions of dollars to fight against Medicare for all. And we will organize the American people around the concept that all people in this country have the right to health care, and at the end of the day, we are going to win that struggle.
Senator, would you include the 11 million undocumented immigrants in that?
Absolutely. When I talk about health care being a human right, last time I heard that undocumented people are human beings as well.
Thank you.
And by the way, let me add to this. I had a very emotional meeting just 2 or 3 weeks ago in California with some undocumented young people, beautiful young people. And I listened to them tell me that they hesitated to apply for college because they would not get the financial aid they needed because they're undocumented. We need the best educated population in the world. That means we're going to make our public colleges and universities tuition-free and open that to the undocumented as well.
Senator, you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
President Trump, in a sense, has begun his re-election campaign, and it is really quite unbelievable and unspeakable, on a promise to round up millions of our immigrant neighbors and to throw them out of this country. And some argue that, that's just campaign rhetoric. Trump is not serious. But let us not forget that this administration is ripping children from the arms of their mothers, and as you indicated a moment ago, some of those children have died. Today, I make a very simple promise to you that protecting the undocumented, that comprehensive immigration reform, that reinstating the legal status to the 1.8 million young people in DACA, that creating a humane border policy will be at the top of my agenda. This will not be something we will do in a year or in 2 years. We will bring the best minds in the immigrant community together to help us write the best laws and to use the powers of the presidency to undo the terrible, terrible damage that this president has done, not just to the immigrant community, but to the integrity of our entire country. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you, Senator Sanders. And our final guest this morning is Senator Amy Caviar. Senator Caviar, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello,
so
Senator.
much. Thank you.
Senator, you have 1 minute for your opening remarks.
Buenos dias.
Yes.
I'm Amy Klobuchar. I'm the senator from Minnesota. I believe that immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. My background is this. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground. He saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college because he couldn't even go to high school. My mom grew up in Milwaukee. She came over to Minnesota to be a teacher. She taught second grade until she was 70 years old. And I stand before you today because of immigrants. My mom was the daughter of immigrants. My dad, the great-grandson of immigrants. I stand before you today, the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, the daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, and the first woman elected to the Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for president of the United States. That is the immigrant story in America. And I got into politics because my daughter was kicked out of the hospital. And I was kicked out of the hospital. She got to be in intensive care, but I'm kicked out of there while she's sitting there in intensive care. And I went to the legislature, and I got one of the first laws in the country passed, guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. So I came into politics because I thought that something was wrong, and something is wrong in our country right now with a president that sends out mean tweets every morning going after immigrants, when in fact we should be working and getting comprehensive immigration reform and economic opportunity for all in this country. That is America.
Thank you, Senator. So your first question. When you were campaigning for Senate in 2006, you supported the building of a fence in the border, and you opposed Social Security for undocumented immigrants. Then you voted yes on a Republican proposed amendment that would have made English the official language of the U.S. government. With this measure, would disenfranchise thousands of Latinos that basically take their driving exams in Spanish and also their voter registrations in Spanish. Senator Caviar, why should the Latino community support your candidacy for president?
Good questions. First of all, I think nearly all Democrats voted for that original bill, which is the bill for comprehensive immigration reform that Senator Ted Kennedy led. And it was not a perfect bill. And of course, I would make changes to it now, and we did in the bill that I worked on in 2012. And I would not support an amendment any longer to make English the official language, because I understand now what that would mean to people in the community in terms of having interpretations on voting and descriptions on things, and you named a number of them. So let's make that clear. But I think when you look at the bills and how they changed over time, they reflect America, and they reflect this change. I've actually been a leader on this on the Judiciary Committee, working on the bill that we passed in 2013. And why do I care so much about this? Because I care about America. This is an issue of moral clarity for all of us. We all stand on the shoulders of immigrants. Look at the facts. 70 of our Fortune 500 companies are led by people from other countries. We have 25% of our U.S. Nobel laureates were born in other countries. Immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. And you look at the kinds of things we need to get done. We have a president that has taken steps that are incredibly negative, not just for immigrants, but for our economy, the way he split people at the border. That's why in my plan that I put out for my first 100 days as your president, I would first of all make sure that we stop this assault on immigrants. We would make sure that we rescind his policies on the temporary status people, right? That he's trying to push out from El Salvador, from Honduras, from Venezuela. We would change that. We would protect the dreamers. I want to make the point to my state of the importance of dreamers. I found a 99-year-old Hispanic war veteran named Joseph Medina. And that guy had fought in World War II under General MacArthur. He told me that when he signed up, that's when he found out that he was undocumented. He'd been brought there as a 5-year-old. And he said back then they went to Canada and they stayed in a hotel room for one night. And then the Army brought them back. And then they were citizens. He stood with me with a number of high school students who wanted to serve in our Air Force, but they couldn't because of changes in American policy. So I think the point here is that if we want to have a country that protects America's security, that means immigrants. If we want to have an economy that works, that means immigrants. And that's why I so strongly supported comprehensive immigration reform. Every vote I've had, every moment I've had to support it, I have, and I strongly oppose Donald Trump's policies.
Thank you, Senator. Your next question comes from Arturo.
Thank you, Vanessa. Senator, we've asked this question of all the candidates because of how important the issue is to the Latino community and to this organization in particular. Next year, the country will experience the constitutionally required decennial census. Under circumstances and policies that researchers, practitioners, and 3 federal courts have said will result in an undercount, especially of Latinos. Now, if you are elected president, the census will have occurred, but what would you do to remedy the 2020 count, and how will you restore credibility and integrity to the census?
Okay, first of all, I would immediately, as president, in my first 100 days, get rid of that citizenship question if it is still on there. That's the number one. Number two, we will have to have a recount if the Supreme Court persists in including this question on there. New evidence has recently come out, even after they had the oral argument on this case in the Supreme Court, that a Republican operative actually, they found when he died, they found his materials, and in it, he showed clearly what their motivation was. And he said that this would help Republicans if they put the citizenship question on the census. So I hope the Supreme Court is going to consider that as they make their decision how they're going to handle this procedurally. But if they don't, I think that we must have a recount. I think that this is wrong. It was done for politically motivated reasons. They are using the people of this country as a pawn. And you've got the Hispanic community who already was undercounted by 1.5% in the last census in 2010, and this would make it even worse. It matters for voting, it matters for benefits, and the whole thing they always say in Washington is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And that is exactly what's going to happen if we continue to have that citizenship question on the census.
Senator, your last question will come from California Insurance Commissioner and NALEO Board Secretary Ricardo Lara. He's a Democrat.
Bienvenida, Senadora.
Buenos dias.
The next president is going to have to address the persistent economic and disparities facing Americans of different races and ethnicities. How does your particular background and experience inform your ability to ensure that the American dream is within everyone's reach?
Thank you for that question. So as I said, I don't come from money. I come from a place where you have to believe that no matter where you come from, no matter who you look like, no matter who you know, no matter who you love, no matter where you worship, that you can get ahead in the United States of America. And that's how I got into politics. I told you my story of getting kicked out of the hospital when my daughter was in intensive care after 24 hours. Growing up, my dad struggled with alcoholism. My parents got divorced when I was 16 years old, and I was someone that I always believed that you got to have a fair and even playing field to get ahead. So my problem with this president right now, when you look at his tax bill, that added $1 trillion to the debt, where most of those benefits go to the wealthiest at the top, that does not help Americans move ahead. When you look at my background, if my grandpa didn't have unions that came in and helped and made those mines safer, I probably wouldn't be here today, right? You look at the kind of playing field that you need for people to succeed if they come from nothing. It's not the world that Donald Trump envisioned. It's not the world that he wants to see for all of us. And so the other thing I'd add to it is just that when I got to the Senate, I represented a state that has a proud Hispanic population. But we also have a lot of refugees in our state. We have people from Somalia, and we have people Hmong that basically had been left out and had nothing when they got to our state. So these mean-spirited words of Donald Trump and these policies have hurt the Hispanic community, but they have also hurt everyone that looks different in this country. I remember the story of a family that went out to dinner, and they were Muslim, and they're sitting there at a restaurant, and this guy walks by and he looks at them, and this could happen to any Hispanics as well, and he says, "You four go home. You go home to where you came from." And the little girl looks at her mom, and she says, "Mom, I don't want to go home and eat dinner tonight. You said we could eat out tonight." You think of the words of that innocent child. She didn't even know what he was talking about, because she only knows one home, and that's my state. That's your state. She only knows one home. That's the United States of America. That's where I'm coming from when it comes to immigrants.
Senator Caviar, you have 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. This is a moment in time like no other. We've always had this shared sense of responsibility and shared prosperity in this country. And that means we look out for each other and we have each other's backs. Right now, we have someone in the White House that tries to divide us every single day. He does it based on race. He does it based on immigrant status. He does it by tweet. He does it by words. And I've always believed that we are an America that must work together. And so that's why I asked for your support. I come from the middle of the country. I come from a background that's different than Donald Trump's and that a lot of the other candidates in this race. But I am someone who has always brought people with me. And I have talked about immigration reform. And I have talked about what's going on at the border. Nearly every campaign stop I've gone to. I've done it in all white audiences because I've got a lot of those in rural Minnesota, right? And I have done it all over this country because I believe it's an economic imperative to include people at the table and in our economy. And so for me, it is policies like not just immigration reform. It is making sure that we've got an increase in the minimum wage. It is making sure that we've got child care available to people, that we have paid family leave, that we do something to make people understand that we need workers right now in our fields and in our hospitals and starting small businesses. And we have so many incredible examples of Hispanics that have achieved in our country. Probably one of my proudest moments, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, was being at the swearing in for Sonia Sotomayor, right? And seeing her at that moment and what she meant, and watching those little girls run up to her, boys too, but a lot of little girls run up to her and give her a hug. That is the kind of thing that changes America right now. And that's what I think you've heard from some fantastic candidates today, but that's what we want to do. We had a great leader in Barack Obama, right? So we know what can happen when we put people at the top that believe that our country should reflect the people with our country. And that's what I want to do. So I want to thank you so much for having me today. I am focused on my top 3 priorities are climate change, economic agenda, and immigration reform, every single place I go. And I vow to you that I will not just do the things I can do in the first 100 days, but I know where those Republican votes are, and I will get immigration reform done in the first year when I'm your president. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you so much, Senator. Once again, on behalf of Telemundo and NALEO Educational Fund, I want to say thank you to all the candidates for taking the time of being here with us. And I would like to turn it to Arturo that you have some important announcements.
Well, my first announcement is to say gracias, Vanessa.
Gracias. My honor, my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you for leading us in this conversation with 8 of the candidates for the nomination of president of their party. I'd like to thank Cesar Conde once again for welcoming us here. And to your team, Luis Rosero, Monica Gil, thank you for all you've done for us. I want to give a special thank you to my team, to Erika Bernal Martinez, Amanda Bosques, Jose Carrillo, Karen Pina, and all of my colleagues at the NALEO Educational Fund who have been working very hard on this forum and on this conference. Can you join me in expressing my appreciation for them? So this is just the beginning of an engagement we need to have with the candidates for the presidency. We only heard from 8. There are many more out there seeking the nomination for the Democratic Party, and there's 2 for the Republican Party. And we hope that in the next several months before the primaries begin that we can have an engagement with all of them. We will continue this conversation back at the hotel at the Intercontinental Miami. The buses will be heading back immediately after this. I invite you to join us at the luncheon at 12:30, where we're going to have a panel that will discuss the census and the 2020 elections. But I think we'll take some moments also to reflect on what we have heard this morning. We will be joined by the co-chairs of the National Latino Commission on the 2020 census, Luby Navarro, who is a member of the Miami-Dade School District Board, Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State of California, Professor Matt Barreto, and my peer, Maria Teresa Kumar of Voto Latino. This concludes our program. Vanessa.
Muchas gracias, Arturo, y quiero darle las gracias a todos ustedes por haber estado aquí en su casa, en Telemundo Center, teniendo esta conversación tan importante y tan crítica para el futuro de todos nosotros los latinos en los Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días.
That no matter come what may, love would prevail. And then, inside the dreams I knew, came the question lovers fear, can true love fail? Well, I would miss the childhood wish and haven't I sung to you of a knight in armor bright, faithful and true, true to you, my darling. After all, I will be the one to hold you in my arms. in my arms, my arms, my arms. I know in my heart and mind that no matter come what may, love will survive. See, love is the author of space and time, and keeps the galaxy and each sparrow alive. And the love that heals the wound after the war is through. And like a knight in armor bright, who'll be faithful and true, true to you, my darling, as